What's up, YouTube? Benjamin here from Grizzly Bear Gear to bring you the next archery video on our channel. In this video, I'm going to be discussing one of the most important and probably arguably the most fun piece of gear that you can purchase for your bow, except for the bow itself. We're going to talk about bow sights. Okay? We're primarily going to be talking about bow sights for hunting, but there's a lot of good tips in this video for the target archers as well. Again, this is going to be mostly compound bow information as well. But as we all know, the sight is fixed to the riser of the bow, and it gives the archer a point of reference to use whilst aiming at his or her target. There are several variables that distinguish one sight from another, and I'm gonna cover all of these in this video. First off, the big splitting point is single versus multiple pins. That's going to be the main talking point in this video, and kind of discuss the pros and cons of each. Other things that matter, these aren't in order, but in the video I'm going to kind of go through them in order of importance in my opinion. So there's single versus multi-pin, there's the fiber size, fiber color, the method of adjustment, and the way that they adjust, the type of mount, so the way that this is going to mount to your bow and how that makes a difference, and the purchasing decision that you have to make there, the degrees of freedom that the sight has. So we're going to talk about the axis. So that's something that a lot of people don't understand, is the second and third axis adjustment. I'll briefly touch on those, and finally we're going to talk about the overall build quality, the way that these are constructed, the materials, those sorts of things, so that way you guys have a better idea when you're shopping for yourself. So, without further ado, if you are indeed prepared, then strap in, get ready, and get ready for some bow sight information, because that's what we're going to be talking about for the next several minutes here. So, if you're ready, let's dive into it. As I said, the first things first, the big way that people split with bow sights is, are you going to go with a single pin sight or a multi-pin sight? If you are a target archer, if that's what you're watching this video to get information about a target sight, you're probably going to go with a single pin sight. The only exception to this would be if you're going to shoot bow hunter class for 3D, which, chances are if you're in this for the target archery, then that's not so much what you're probably not going to be shooting in the bow hunter class. There's no reason why, if you're a beginning target archer and you bought a kit bow and it comes with a multiple pin sight, there's nothing wrong with that. You can use a multiple pin sight, but the serious target archers are going to use single pin sights 100% of the time, to be quite frank. So the number of pins in the housing, so if you have your sight here, now this is an example of a single pin sight. That being said, this is still going to be the housing on a single or multiple pin sight. It's where the pins are literally housed, the housing. So the number of pins in the housing is arguably the biggest personal preference decision in your bow setup. So this is literally each to his own. There's not a right or a wrong. But when I was selling bow sights every day to hunters, the first decision I always would ask when it comes to the bow sight is, would you like a single pin sight or a multiple pin sight? Because you can't really talk about sights without deciding one or the other. So everything goes different ways at that split in the road. And then depending on their answer, that's where we would go, and we would continue narrowing down until they were able to settle on a particular model. Again, there's not a right or a wrong to a single and multiple pin. There's not a right or a wrong answer to that question. But there are pros and cons to both, so to each his own. Let's start with multiple pin sights. So in a multiple pin sight inside the housing, you will have, instead of one pin, like on this sight, you would have multiple pins, and they will, on all sights that I know of except for Trophy Ridge makes some sights that are vertical, and then they're stacked one on top of another. But for all the other manufacturers, a multiple pin sight are going to be coming out horizontally. Okay, and then the pins will be glowing in a row vertically, but the pins themselves are in the housing horizontally, so perpendicular to the deck. And they're gonna be between 3 and 7 pins inside the housing. That's how many are going to be in there on a multi-pin sight. Now, The big advantage of a multiple pin sight, I would say, is speed. So, for example, I'm going to paint you a portrait. Put yourself in this situation. You're in the tree stand, a buck's approaching, and he's 50 yards, 40 yards, 30 yards. You draw your bow, and 3 seconds later, he's closed the distance down to 15 yards. Okay? So when you first drew, he was at, say, 30 or 40 yards, and then now he's at 15 just a moment later. So because you're using a multiple pin sight, you have that 20-yard pin, or say you even have a 15-yard pin. You have that pin there ready to rock. You don't have to worry about it. You can just shoot. You put the right pin on him and you shoot. Say you had a deer and it's the opposite situation. He's offering you no shot, 10 yards, 20, 30. You're at full draw because at first he was right here, so you're already at draw, and he's walking out, and he ends up stopping, giving you a shot at say 30 yards. Well, if you were using a single pin sight, you're going to have to guess a little bit. You're going to have to kind of aim high or low. You're going to have to know your bow, know the drop of your arrow to make that shot. Whereas on a multiple pin sight, you're already ready to rock. You've got all those pins laid out for you. Usually they're going to be spaced in 10-yard increments. For the beginners watching, they're going to be, your top pin's going to be 20 yards, and then they're going to work their way down. So you're going to have a 20, a 30, 40, 50 yard pin, or what have you. That's generally the way that people set them up. Now, I've heard of guys setting them up different ways, but I mean, that's what I would do if I was shooting a multiple pin sight. Every 10 yards, starting at 20 and working your way further. So in that situation we just discussed, because you already had those pins set up, you were able to just make the shot. Again, with a single pin sight, what you would have to do, the way that these work, you're not just stuck. Like, I don't just sight this sight in for 20 yards and I'm stuck at 20 yards, and then anything farther than that I'm just aiming high and guessing. That's not the way it works. What's going to happen here is I have a wheel that I can turn and literally adjust the distance that my sight is set to. So if I hold this up closer to the camera, you can see that there's marks, and I put a tape on here so you can see really well. So what I can do is I would adjust this to a different yardage, and I know exactly what my pin is set to. So that's the difference between a multiple and a single. On a single pin, you only have the one pin, and you have to adjust it to a different mark. On a multiple pin sight, they're there, they're ready to rock at different yardages after you've sighted them in. Now, the downside to using them, so it's great, it's faster, you always have a pin there that's ready to go for the different yardages. The downside of using a multiple pin sight is that there are multiple pins. So these pins can blur up, so if it's, especially if it's sunny, those pins are going to be really bright because of the fiber optic is going to be absorbing a lot of light, and they're going to be very big. It's called starburst pins, where they're big and they could even blur together a little bit. This is another thing, is that they overcrowd the target. So if you just have one pin, say you're aiming at my mouth, okay, so you have the one pin on a single pin sight. On a multiple pin sight, you have all these pins, and you have to put one of those pins on your target, okay? Well, what you've done is you have a lot of extra pins there that are covering up parts of the target, which to a lot of guys is confusing. It's just not ideal because you have all this obstruction, all these pins obstructing the target. So you don't have a nice big field of view of the target. A lot of it's obstructed, okay? So that's another downside. And then I've even heard this one where clients have said to me that they've actually used the wrong pin. Then say they knew that the deer was at 20 yards. He was there, he was at 20 yards, they knew it, but they accidentally used their 30-yard pin. Because, I mean, in the heat of the moment, you can make mistakes. I don't think I would ever do that, but I mean, it can happen. I mean, it happens to the best of us. So we all do some silly things sometimes. So those are the downsides. The pins can blur up, they can blur together, they can overcrowd. Some people, it overcrowds the target, and it's not good for their mind. They just don't like seeing all those pins covering up parts of the target. They like to see a whole target there. And then sometimes you could even use the wrong pin. In the heat of the moment, you could just screw up and pick the wrong pin in error. So on a single pin sight, you basically have the opposite value proposition. Again, target archers, you're going to use single pin sights because there's no need to have a bunch of pins, and the one pin is just going to give you a nice clear field of view of the target, no obstruction, and yeah. So a target archer, you're going to stick to a single pin sight 100% of the time. Unless you're just, like I said, unless you're just starting out and that's what the bow came with, it's okay. I mean, hey, go out there and shoot, have fun. It's not going to matter for a while whether or not you have a good field of view of the target. You know, you're not shooting for score just yet anyway. All right. So obviously on a single pin sight, you only have the one nice clean pin in the housing. So everything else in the housing is just open space. You just see the whole target, and there's just one pin on the target, and that's all you got to worry about. It's very easy to focus. The simplicity of the single pin design makes it easier to see the pin and the target with less obstruction, and you know, it would be impossible to confuse which pin to use because there's only the one. So there's no way you're accidentally going to use the 40-yard pin on a 30-yard shot. It's not going to happen. You could, I guess, forget to move your sight, so you forget to adjust to the right range, and then you're up a creek without a paddle. Now, the huge downside, again, it's the opposite value proposition of a multi-pin sight. The big downside is that you will have to operate the mechanism built into the sight to adjust to a different range. This could cost you an animal at some point. Okay, at some point there could be the buck of a lifetime walking by you, and he's moving quick. He goes 10, 20, 30. You think your shot's going to be for 25 yards, so you dial your sight in for 25 yards, and then he scoots right on by and he gives you a shot and he's out at 42 yards. Well, are you gonna fling the arrow? If you really don't know your setup, are you gonna fling that arrow? You shouldn't. So it could potentially cost you an animal someday because you don't have that pin ready to go and you didn't have time to readjust your sight. You know, it's the breaks. It could happen. That's hunting. So that's single versus multiple pin. You're basically trading speed for precision and a nice clean field of view. On a multiple pin sight, you have them all there. They're ready to go. On a single pin sight, you have a really nice clean field of view. It's easy to focus on. In my opinion, it's, you know, if you're ADHD at all, then having just the one pin's a lot easier to look at than having 4 pins floating around. So that's the difference. There's not a right versus a wrong answer. It's just you decide what works best for you, what you think you're going to do better with. If you're just starting out, it is a tough decision. So my suggestion would be, see if you can try somebody else's. I mean, a lot of guys, like, I got sights lying around. If you talk to somebody who's been doing this for a while, chances are they got one that you could try for a little while and see what your preference is before you buy one. These things are pricey. I mean, they are. You can pick up a $20 one, but it's not the same as the $100 one or the $200 one. It's not. So before you buy an expensive one, maybe you could try one out that's somebody else's. The next thing, so, you know, we're done talking about if you want a single or a multiple pin sight. The rest of these tips are universal for both sides. Now, they're going to apply differently depending on whether or not you went with a single versus a multiple pin sight. But there's you know, plenty of other options here when you're shopping for a sight. So something else to consider is the method of adjustment. So obviously on a single pin sight, it's the way, like on this sight, there's a wheel here that I gotta turn to adjust the pin. On a multiple pin sight, you have all those pins. They're just going to be locked in place once you're set. However, when I'm talking about the method of adjustability, this means when you're sighting it in, how are you going to adjust those pins? How does the housing move? How does the individual pin move? This is something, I mean, in my opinion, it's the second biggest thing to consider when you're looking at a sight, because this is how it works. Other than it literally just being bolted to your bow and you using it as an aiming tool, what you're going to be doing with it is adjusting it, is tinkering with it. So that's the bread and butter of what this thing can do. If all it was something mounted to your bow and that's all it had to do, then I mean, then this wouldn't matter. But that's not what it is. It's an adjustable sight. So the way it adjusts is important. It's critical, in fact. So some sights are offered with what is called micro adjust. Now what that means is you're able to generally turn a knob of some sort. This sight actually doesn't have micro adjust, but so let's see if you guys can see that there. Do you see how there's those hash lines right here? Now some sights won't even have those. So you got to think, when you're trying to adjust your sight, it's going to be very important that you have some kind of a marking system, so that way you know where you were. So if I'm shooting to the right over and over again, I want to know, okay, I was on this hash mark that's marked 12. and I need to move my sight a little bit over to the right, so I'm going to bump it over to a 13. And that way you know where you were. On some sites it's just bare, so you're just guessing. You loosen up the bolt and you go to push and you're just like and it's just a guess. Now that's not necessarily what micro adjust is, but that's another feature, is that, you know, does it have some kind of marking system so that way you know where you were. On a micro adjust site, what you can literally do is turn a knob or use an Allen key to turn a knob, and it's going to move the sight at a very, very fine increments. Now they also make arrow rests now with micro adjust. It's a really nice feature. If all else being equal between two different sites and they're at the same price point, I would definitely choose one with micro adjust, because when you're sighting in, it's going to make a world of difference. On a site that you just have to turn a bolt and push it, it's real easy to push it too far and lose your spot and be like, oh no, and you're basically starting over again. On micro adjust, you just turn it real fine increment, you lock it back up, and you're good to go. It's really, really nice. I sighted in thousands of bows. I've sighted in thousands of guys, and I can tell you with micro adjust, it's way faster. So it's not going to be a huge deal if you're one of those guys who, you know, you're going to get your bow set up, you're going to get some arrows, you're going to stick with those arrows at that draw weight, at that draw length. Same, I mean, it's going to be the same setup for a couple years, and you're never going to tinker with things. Once it's set, and you're not going to really have to touch it, I mean, hardly at all. If you're one of those guys, hey, I mean, how easy or hard it is to adjust doesn't matter so much. But if you're like me, and every year you're getting new arrows, you like to try different releases, you're constantly cutting off D-loops and putting a new one on, you're trying different accessories, it's going to be nice if your sight is easy to adjust. So let that sink in. If you're going to be changing things up, think about the way your sight's going to adjust, because it's going to make life a lot easier. So that's micro adjust, is very fine increments. It makes it very easy to sight in. In that same vein, there are toolless sights. So some sights, you can actually just adjust them without any tools. So like on this sight, I'll have to go in with an Allen wrench and loosen up a bolt, like a lock nut. Let's call it a lock nut or a set screw. Once that's loose, then I can make my adjustments and then lock it shut again, and then it's not going to go anywhere. Some sites you can just turn a knob with your fingers, and that's the set screw. You just turn that and then it's loose, and then you can micro adjust or push and then lock it back up with your fingers. It's very nice. So toolless, again, if all else is equal, a toolless sight wins, so go with that. And that's going to be again a really big deal if you're always going back and forth between arrows. Say you're using the same sight, the same bow, but you're using it for 3D one weekend and you're using it for hunting the next weekend, and you're constantly going back and forth between your two different sets of arrows. It's going to be huge if you can adjust your sight on the fly. So things to consider, we're getting through them. All right, so with a multiple pin sight too, you're gonna have all those different pins. You're gonna have adjustments called gang adjustments, where you adjust the whole housing, you move all of the pins at once, and then there's going to be adjustments for each individual pin. So look at those things when you're shopping, find the one that you think is going to be the best for you. Some sites like Spot Hogs, the pins are all cantilevered, so they'll have 2 screws per pin, and you tighten one and loosen one. Well, vice versa, you'll loosen one, then tighten the other one, then loosen one, tighten the other one, and that's how you'll move the sight. So it's a little bit more complicated, arguably more durable, or more precise. So pros and cons of each. Some sites it's really chintzy and they're just all on a rail, all like one big rail, and you're just loosening up a set screw, moving it and shutting it. Those are kind of a guessing game. Some sites now, like, I mean, one of the most popular sites on the market today, and you hear all about it, is the Trophy Ridge React. That's a multiple pin sight where all the pins are basically on a spring, and you'll sight in for 20 yards, and I think it's 50 yards or 60 yards. You could probably use whatever, I mean, probably anything like 50 or 60 yards, and it'd probably work out just fine. You sight in those 2 pins, and all the other ones are just already spaced out perfectly. Kind of works at the same concept as a sight tape. If you sight in at 20 and 60, all the other gaps are going to be pretty much exactly dead on, and it's proven to be a fact to where all the manufacturers are kind of making their own variety of, you know, automatically sighted in sights, or on a single pin sight, they all pretty much come with a sight tape. So like you can see on this sight, I just have a tape with lines drawn on it as like a rough sight tape for the time being, but underneath you can see where I used to have where I already had it all sighted in, and each line, I mean down to the yard, was precisely marked because the sight tape just knows exactly where it needs to be based on me sighting in at 20 and 60. I could do a whole video on that, so I'm just touching on it so you guys know what's out there. So that's adjustability. I mean, that's the gist. You want to find one that's going to work best for you. They all have different ways of adjusting, and that's going to impact the durability, the longevity of the sight, and it's going to, I mean, that ease of use is huge. If all else is equal, you got to find things that separate one from another, because there's going to be a lot of sights in each price range. If you're shopping that, especially like $100 to $200, if you're in there somewhere shopping for a sight, there are hundreds of them. So these are the things that you can look at that will help you make the decision, an informed decision. You're not just going to the shop going, hey, what do you guys think I should get? Because the guy who's working at the shop, even if he says he's not, he's making a commission. So one way or another, trust me, he makes money if he sells you certain sites. Trust me. See, they have your best interest in heart, okay? Like, I wouldn't go home and sleep well if I sold people junk all day. I couldn't do it. That being said, he doesn't, if he thinks that he can get away with selling you one he's going to make a commission on, why wouldn't he do that? He's going to do it, guys. So, you know, when I read online all these sites that people are buying, I go, ooh, like, yeah, well, that's because the guy at the bow shop made 20 bucks if he sold you that one. Okay, so he didn't care if you got that one or the other one, but he might as well say get this one. So that's the point of this video. This way you're getting the information that you need to make your own decision before you go in. Guys, you're spending, I would consistently sell $1,400 to $2,000 bow setups to somebody who didn't have a clue what they wanted when they walked in the door. And to me, that's just like mind-blowing. Like, how are you going to spend all this money without knowing what you're buying beforehand? I would never do that, but you would be shocked how many people do. This way you guys know. That's why I'm making these videos. Okay, so we've covered single versus multi-pin, and we've covered how they adjust. Now, the next big thing, in my opinion, and somewhat in order of importance, I would say, is the degrees of freedom. So you see a lot of companies advertising that their site has second and third axis adjustment. So what does this mean? On your site, you can adjust the housing to tip like this, and you can also adjust it. Alright, so how am I going to show you this? You could also adjust it like this. So you could rock it like this, and you can also rock it like this. That's your second and third axis. Okay? Why would you ever want to do that? Well, the fact of the matter is, on some sites, on some bows, it's going to be on there, and it might not be straight vertical. Okay? Or it might be cocked a little bit like this. This way you can adjust those things and get it perfect. When does this matter? It matters when you're shooting at an angle. So if you're on the 3D course, or if you're out west and you aim down a hill, that's going to throw your shot off considerably. I'm talking maybe an inch at 20 yards, 2 or 3 inches at 30 yards. Matters. I mean, it matters a little bit, because, hey, if you miss by 4 inches, you might still get that deer. But if your sight throws you off an extra inch, and now you miss by 5 inches, that could be a shoulder blade, that could be a gut shot, where it would have been right through the lungs. So, just like in baseball, we're doing everything we can to slightly increase our odds. Okay, you want to increase your odds. You don't want any excuses. Your gear shouldn't be an excuse. This is something you can control. You can't control if you're out there in the woods and a deer walks by you or not. You can't really control that. You can be in the best spot in the world. That deer could have walked by every day for 6 years. And today he decides not to walk by. You can't control that. You can control if your gear is set up right. So the degrees of freedom, the second and third axis adjustment, does it matter? Yeah. So again, all else being equal, you might as well go with the one with the extra axis adjustment. I'm going to tell you, this is my personal hunting site. This one doesn't have third axis adjustment. As it pans out, I got to try this at the shop before I bought it, and the third axis is just dead nuts on with this sight, so I didn't have to worry about it. This sight on my bow, I don't have to adjust it anyway. I mean, obviously you guys don't have the levels and a bow vise and all that to try this at home, but here's my thing about third axis adjustment. You're throwing in another way that the sight moves. So it's another way that if I'm hunting, I could bang it on something and it could potentially move and alter my whole sight. So, you know, being able to set up these axis can help improve accuracy, especially when you're hunting from a tree stand or you're going to be shooting up and down hills. It does improve your accuracy if you can get those set up. It's not necessary. It is a good bit of extra work, or if you're taking it into the shop, could cost you some extra money to have them do that. And it does create extra things that can go wrong. If all else is equal, it's still a good durable sight. I would say go for it. You might as well have it and have it set up right, and then you just know. Again, you're eliminating any excuses that you might have had for missing or wounding game. You want to eliminate those excuses. Increase your odds the most that you can. That's the key to success. So, moving on, the next main topic I would say is how does this mount to your bow? So this sight is a hard mount. It just has a couple of screws there. You see this right here? Okay, so it just has a couple of screws, and you're just going to take this baby and bolt it right onto your sight, or right onto your bow. So it will, all sights will mount right to your riser. Okay? Simple. That's a hard mount. It just bolts directly on. The other way that they make sights is now getting more and more popular, is with a dovetail mount. What a dovetail mount is there will be a bracket, and the bracket will mount to your riser, and it just has one large set screw. And you can take your sight and it slides into this adapter, this bracket on your riser, and then you lock that set screw down, and then your sight's fixed to the bow. And then you can loosen up the set screw and slide it off. So it's really quite handy. What does this give you? The dovetail, first it allows the archer, you can run your sight farther away from yourself. You can run it farther away from the riser. So what that gives you is it improves your precision by, it's literally pushing that sight farther away from you. So you're increasing the geometry between your eye, the peep, and the sight. So that's going to make you a little bit more precise. Okay? Think about if you're aiming with a handgun versus a rifle, and the rear aperture is farther away from the front aperture on a rifle. That inherently makes you more accurate than on a pistol, where the two sights could only be this far apart. You're less precise. Same thing with the dovetail. If you'll look at a target archer's sight, they'll run it 12 inches away from the riser. It makes you a little bit more precise. Okay? It makes it a snap to take your sight on and off the bow. So it just takes a second, you go and pop it off. This is great if you're traveling, you're constantly putting it in a bow case. Some sights and some bow cases and bows, it's not going to fit inside your case. So what do you do if you have a hard mount in that situation? I mean, you basically have to get a new case or scrap the sight, which, I mean, up to you. But the dovetail eliminates that. You can just pop it on, pop it off. Great if you're going to be tinkering with things. It makes it easy to, it's easy to take the sight on and off. You don't have to totally unscrew it and remove it and put wear and tear on your riser. The other thing that is really cool about the dovetail is it'll have multiple spots that you can set the set screw. So usually a range, they're usually like 9 inches, 6 to 9 inches long. There's usually every inch a different spot that you could set the set screw. So what you can do is, depending on what size peep you have, you can pick the sweet spot right where the housing fits perfectly inside of your peep. And obviously that's preferential. If you don't know, like I've seen a lot of this, is where a guy will have a peep that's really, really small and you can't even see the outside ring of their sight, or vice versa. They'll have a huge giant peep and the sight's like this tiny little bubble inside of a giant circle there. You want your peep sight to ring the ring of your sight housing. Copper John was the first company to make circular housings, and that is now industry standard. All housings are circles now, and the reason is that way your peep can ring this nice and even. That's what you want to be looking at, guys. If you're looking through your peep sight you want that peep to nice and snug ring that ring around your sight. And that's how you can be sure you're anchoring very consistently. And I mean, your consistency is everything in archery, as we know. So anyway, back to the point, is the dovetail, you can move this in and out so that you get it perfectly centered in there. Now, what I just said too, real quick, you might want a little tiny bit of daylight around the edges of this, because worst thing you can have is if your peep's too small and you can only just see your pin magically floating in there. You want to see the ring. Okay, so if you want a little bit of daylight, say like this, that would be good. You just don't want it where this is what you have, where that ring can bobble all. See how inaccurate you are? You're so imprecise, you don't know. Okay, so with the dovetail, you can get your peep to ring your housing perfectly even. Alright? Dovetails are basically standard on all target sites. I can't think of a target specific site that doesn't have a dovetail mount. They all are. Again, target archers are focusing on being very precise. So as a hunter, you can learn a lot from the way that target archers do things to help you be a better shot. And then again, the hard mount it's bolting right on. The downside to this is that it's basically fixed on there. You can't really take it off. It's going to stay on it until you get a new sight, or until the sight is switched on and off the bow for some reason. I would argue that again, you're taking away one more connection from the whole thing. You're taking away one thing that can go wrong. So the dovetail might wear out, could slip. You could accidentally put it in a different hole, which is going to affect your sight, like where your point of impact is going to be. Slightly, but it's going to affect it. If your sight is 6 inches from the riser, one shot, and then you move it out to 7 inches, it's going to affect your point of impact slightly. So it's one more thing that could go wrong that you eliminate by using a hard mount. And I would say it's not even up for debate that it's going to be a little bit more durable to go with a hard mount. And that kind of leads us right into the last major point, which is build quality. So some sights are just flat out better made than others. The different materials, some of them are solid metal. There's plastic, like composite plastics. Seen a lot of sights made of carbon now. Those are kind of the standard materials they're made of. Generally, the more plastic, the more fragile. So you'll see a lot of broken plastic sights. Those are the ones that are going to be 25 to 40 bucks. I mean, you get what you pay for, especially in the build quality category and the adjustment category. Those two things that's where you're losing. That's the difference between your $200 sight and your $60 sight, is the build quality, including the materials that they use to make it, and how, like, the method of adjustments. Those are the big differences. Also, that third axis, I mean, all the extra ways that a sight can move add up, those add up the bill. You could literally line up the sights by their features, and I could give you the price tags, and you could price them after I told you all the features of each. These things are slotted exactly where they belong price-wise. I mean, almost exactly. Then, if you find two within $20 of each other from different manufacturers, there's differences from one manufacturer to the next. Okay, so some manufacturers just do things, in my opinion, a little bit better than others. I'm not going to get into that. Lord knows that would lead to some hate. So again, generally, the more plastic, the more fragile. The material matters, guys, obviously. Metal's very, very durable. Some might weigh a little bit more than others. There are some cheesy metal sights that I've seen them just shear right in half or just bend. So I've seen sights bent. I've seen these things. I have seen them literally. I mean, now you won't see this with this company, but you will see. I've seen sights where like it just is just broken right off, and it was metal. I mean, like aluminum and things. It's a fact. So you're going to get what you pay for. The other, kind of newish material that you'll see in a lot more sights made of is carbon. It's a cool material. I mean, it's durable. It's very rigid, so it doesn't flex or anything. And I mean, it's either going to be perfect or it's going to be snapped and broken. And the big thing is the carbon is so light. That's why it's an awesome material. So if you're going for that lightweight bow setup, you know, you're getting a carbon bow and you're using basically no stabilizers, and you buy that foam quiver that weighs nothing, and you know, you might want to go with the carbon sight too. You're trying to shave weight because you're going to be out west hiking around and being active. Now, watch the video on stabilizers if you want to figure out more about mass weights, because mass weight is your friend as an archer. But if you're out there hiking around and you're counting, you know, the calories inside your backpack and how much each weighs just to try to shave weight because you're going to be hiking for the next 14 days, yeah, I mean, I could see going with a lightweight bow setup, and a carbon sight is a good way to shave some weight. The goofiest thing oh man, I loved it. Whenever there would be somebody with a carbon bow, they paid that extra $500 so their bow isn't made of metal, it's now made of carbon, and then they slapped like all the heaviest accessories on it, and you know, 3/4 of a pound of stabilizers. You see somebody like that, you gotta shake your head like, why did you buy the carbon bow? Just to slap a pound of accessories on there makes no sense. Things that make you go, things that you don't really think about until you do it as a full-time job, I would say. So those are some good materials. Also, as far as the build quality goes, a quick note. Note the other things, like the way that the overall housing and the mount is made, that's very important. But notice how the little pieces are made. Notice how the fiber is wrapped inside this sight, how it wraps around the housing, or you know, what is the fiber doing? Like how did they run that? Notice how the mechanisms that make the sight move, if it's a single pin sight, how you adjust the sight. Notice on a multiple pin sight how each individual pin moves as well as the house. See if those movements and adjustments, see if they're very good durable or if they're cheesy junk. These are things to notice when you're buying a sight. If it gets water in it and it freezes, is it still going to work? Those are the things you got to look for. What else? Let's quickly do fiber size. So there's obviously different size fiber. The standards are 10 thousandths, 19 thousandths, and 21 thousandths. Those are the standard hunting sizes. So you'll see, like in target archery, guys use all different stuff, stickers and big old oversized things and very small fiber. But with bow hunting setups, those are the three sizes: 10 thousandths, 19 thousandths, 21 thousandths fiber. Obviously, this basically depends on how good your vision is, depending on your situation. If you're hunting in pines, you know, you might have more low light situations than somebody that's hunting on the edge of a field. But basically, a smaller fiber, you're going to be able to aim more precise, and a larger fiber is going to allow you to see the pin better. Personal preference, it really boils down to how good your eyesight is and where you're going to be hunting. Fiber color is in the same niche there. It's basically all personal preference. It is generally accepted that green fiber is the one that most people can see earliest in the morning and latest at night. In the low light, green is basically the best visibility wise. Now there's all different colors. Should you choose to use blue, there's such a thing as blue fiber and it looks awesome, but to use blue fiber you need a blue burst light. So if you can't use a light, or you don't want to use a light, then blue is out of the question. If you're using a multiple pin sight, you don't want all of your pins to be green or all of your pins to be red. Make them different colors, or at least every other. At least go like red, green, red, green, red, green. Best case scenario, make them as different as possible, so that way you don't have that oops moment where you confuse your 30-yard for your 40-yard pin on a big buck. You know, so make your pins different colors. What else? I mean, we're basically done. With like I mentioned, sight lights for the blue one, for the blue fiber. Make sure they're legal before you use one, obviously, but they are nice to have. I mean, you might as well have it, guys. What if it's all of a sudden cloudy one night, and like particularly cloudy, and it gets dark earlier than normal, and you can't see your pin when a deer walks by? You might as well have invested 20 bucks in a little light that screws on your sight. Not all sights can take a light. There's some lights that are somewhat universal and will work on some of those screwier sights, but you know, it's something to look at when you're shopping. Can this sight accept a light, and if so, how much would the light cost for this sight? Another decision factor. As with anything that has a battery, I don't like batteries when I'm hunting because it's just something that can go wrong. You can't trust a battery. that's why I left all the battery powered sights kind of out of this video. That being said, I've never actually heard a bad review about one of those battery sights. So I'm talking about those ones with a glass lens that creates a crosshair or pins on the glass lens for you. They are awesome. I've seen them, I've set them up. They work great, they look great, really, really bright and visible. You can adjust how bright, or basically the size of the fiber. I just don't like batteries. That's my opinion. If I'm hunting, it shouldn't have a battery. That's just me though. That's just me. I have never heard a bad review about one of those sites. So, you guys can decide there. Basically, though, all those are going to work just like a single pin. That's how they're going to work. Personally, I use a single pin sight. I do like that clean field of vision with just the one pin, and you can see all the target around it. I have never experienced an issue where I couldn't shoot at a deer because I couldn't adjust my sight in time. It's never come up in my in my 14 years of hunting deer with a bow. I've never struggled to shoot at one because I couldn't adjust my sight in time. I lock my sight in at 25 yards, and I'm good all the way down to like 4 yards at the base of my tree, and I'm good out to 35 yards. Around 35 yards, I would aim an inch high. Okay, and that's all as far as I would ever shoot at a deer. I would shoot 40. That's my limit, but it's never come up. It's never been a problem, guys. So I do use the single pin sight. I do use a green fiber, and it is 19 thousandths. It gives me the best of both worlds, precision and visibility. And then I'll go ahead and tell you which one. This one that we use as the demo, and this is my personal sight. It is a Montana Black Gold. This one is the Ascent Verdict. It is available at grizzlybeargear.com. The Black Gold Ascent Verdict is a single pin in this case, but they do make it in a 3-pin, and it's the same idea where you can still adjust all 3 pins and just use the bottom pin as a slider. So you have 20, 30, 40, and if you wanted to shoot 80 yards at a tournament or something, you can still adjust, and that what was your 40-yard pin could become your 80-yard pin with a simple turn of this dial. So it's a really cool sight. There's some copycats out there, but the Black Gold Ascent is top notch. In the biggest bow shop in the world where I worked, there was, I think, 6 guys inside the shop that used the Montana Black Gold sights. They are excellent. They are excellent. They are ugly, in my opinion, but excellent, excellent, excellent. I'll do a product review on that another time. So thank you so much for watching this video. It ran very long. I had no control over that. I had to cover everything about bow sights. So I think that if you sat there and watched 40 minutes of talk about bow sights, you now know what took me my whole life to learn about bow sights. Okay, I just gave it all to you for free. Please give me a thumbs up if you learned anything. It's akin to just giving a round of applause at the end of a presentation. I think it's just, how hard is it just to click that thumbs up button? If you hated me, if you hated the video, you can give it a thumbs down. I can't prevent that. Again, it would only take you a second to do that. The thing that you can do that would help me is to hit the subscribe button. I would really appreciate it if you guys will subscribe. That way you get notified when the new videos come out. That's what would help me out. So if you guys don't mind hitting the subscribe button, that would be great. I mean, why not? It only takes you a second. Whatever style of sight you choose, please look and see if we have it on grizzlybeargear.com, because we do donate 10% to conservation. I believe that hunters, with all my heart, I believe that hunters are the #1 conservationists in the world. I believe we are the guys that are out there protecting the environment. We're the ones out in it. We are the ones that know about it more than any other group. We're the #1 conservationists, and I think that we need to keep proving it. I mean, every year we need to prove it so that we protect the sport that we love, which is hunting. If we don't, then we will lose it. People, some guys shake that off, but I mean, in some ways it's already happening where you can't find permission to hunt, or you can't, do anything, I mean, unless you pay to lease some land or you pay to go out west. I mean, shoot, A moose hunt is almost like a fairy tale at this point. It's going to cost you $50,000 to go hunt a moose. We will lose our sport if we don't proactively stay in our slot as the #1 conservationist. So if you want to buy anything hunting, archery, dog training, shooting related, please reach out to me on grizzlybeargear.com, and I will see if I can get that product added to our inventory, so that way 10% of the purchase will go to conservation, which I think is as important as anything else in the world. Thank you again for watching. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. Have a great day.